what's up, everybody? This is Open Discussion with C3 Films. My name is Chris, and this is...
Cheryl.
And today we're going to be talking about the Flashpoint Paradox DC animated movie. This is a part of our series where we'll also be comparing it to the Flash film that just recently came out and is now available to watch on Max. So spoilers for both of those movies, because there's no way we're not going to talk about this movie without making comparisons to the other one, and the same thing when we do that segment on that video. So you have been warned. If you haven't seen either of those movies, you definitely want to at least watch the animated Flashpoint film. You don't necessarily need to watch the Flash movie, but if you just want to avoid spoilers all around, go check out the Flash movie on HBO and then come back and see what we had to say about both these films. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, I have been following a lot of the a lot of the DC animated films ever since I was young. Like DC's animated movie division is some top tier storytelling. Not just their movie division, but like their animated shows too. Like I'm sure people will remember Batman the animated series, the Superman series, Justice League, Batman Beyond, Young Justice. So like when it comes to animation, DC is unmatched. Like Marvel doesn't come close to touching them. And so what DC did was they launched a New 52 inspired universe in their animated movie line. And the Flashpoint Paradox film was the first movie that was going to catapult that New 52 storyline into an animated movie world. So as when I came in watching this movie the first time, this is my second time or third time seeing it. When I came in watching it the first time, I was not. I always thought the Flash was cool, but I was never like a fan of the Flash like that. But over like a couple of years, I slowly started to love speedsters more and more, and now Flash is up there as like one of my favorite heroes, and this movie is a very big reason why. So before we get into the specifics of like the movie itself, I'm kind of curious, Cheryl, as someone who hasn't really watched these animated films like that. I'm curious, like, what were your thoughts, like, kind of going into it? Was it something that you expected? Were you surprised to see how violent the movies could be? Like, what were your thoughts?
I think like at this point, I'm not surprised anymore to see that kind of violence in animations, especially when it comes to I guess comic superhero related stuff, because we have seen, like, for our show, we have seen a lot of different animations that are actually even more violent than this. So the violence didn't surprise me. I don't think I was very surprised generally, because I have seen because I had watched the Flash movie before watching Flashpoint, and I had also seen a version of Flashpoint in the Flash CW version. So it wasn't like there was nothing new in this. It's just different for me. It's like a different variation of the same story being told.
Right. And then in that case, how did you feel about how this story was told? Because you have three versions to compare to now.
Yeah, I think like so. The other, I guess, a spoiler alert for the CW show. That one, for that the CW Flash and the movie The Flash, he runs back in time to change the past to try to save his mother, and in this version, while that's still true, it's the twist. And there's like a play on
Yeah.
Zoom being blamed for the the changing of time. So that kind of bothered me a little bit. Like I was watching it with my boyfriend, and I literally said, it's weird that they use Zoom as the person who changes time and saves his mother and stuff like that, and then you find out later that it wasn't Zoom, it was actually him. And I wish actually, I don't really know how I feel, because I thought it was misleading, and then when you find out later, I'm like, oh, okay. But I kind of miss the idea of him going back in time himself and then realizing that he made a mistake and having to see the damage that he's done and work towards fixing it, because I think that gives him a better arc than what was in the Flashpoint animation. So, not that I didn't like it, but I think the arc kind of came too late for me because of the twist, and they spend so little time on him in remorse and trying to fix and undo what he's done. So it's kind of like the stakes are somewhat lowered for me in that animation version.
Interesting. Okay. Actually, so I guess we're going to get right into this part. So this was actually the one thing that I said I think that and don't get used to this, is the only time I'm going to say this. This is actually one of the things that I think that the live action Flash movie did better than the animation, was making it more about him learning to let go of his mom. And this one, though, has a better overall arc, as to me at least, because at least at the end, he comes to accept the lesson that his mom teaches him in the beginning, because that's the theme of the movie, is, accepting what you can change and letting go of what you can't. But by the time we get to the end of the movie, there's no real moment where we get to see him saying goodbye to her. Like the mom, we see her at the beginning, and then she just disappears out of the movie. And the movie, to its credit, is an hour and 22 minutes, and it hits the ground running. It goes, and you really feel like you're going through all these plot points and meeting these characters, and that's all well and good. But the one thing that the Flash live action movie did that was nice was giving Barry a moment to kind of talk to his mom and really accept letting her go, and having to like really say goodbye to her for the final time. And from an emotional point, that's something that's very powerful. However, then they, in the Flash movie, the live action, they then messed that stuff up by having him still change something in the past, and therefore he actually didn't learn anything because he still changed something. But in this movie, he accepts that he can't have his mom live, and he doesn't change anything. And then he learns to just be satisfied with where he is in life. And so, at least for the message is way stronger and better in the animated version of the film than it is in the live action version of the film, where Barry still changes something in the past, despite the message being you can't you can't you can't change the past. So yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that I really liked about the animation is how there's still, like, we get a reward for everything that we had just seen and, gone through with the characters. As in, Bruce gets a letter from his dad, and
Yes.
Barry gets memories of a different timeline, so he can
Where his mom was alive.
yeah, so he has
Yeah.
memories of two different lives that he gets to have, and it's like a gift. Like, that's what Batman says, that he should think of it as a gift. And so I thought that was really heartwarming, and that's such a nice way to end the film. And it kind of, like, everything that I was just kind of upset about the whole Zoom thing and it being like, not as wholesome to me, was just kind of wrapped up nicely with that ending with Batman. So
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is that, like, so this movie, one thing it does very well is that it incorporates all the big players, because essentially it is a Justice League movie, and therefore the Justice League have a stake in the actual story. One of the things you'll hear me complain about for the live action Flash movie is the fact that there's no real connection to the overall, like, the overall problem that's happening in the world. Like, Zod doesn't even know who Flash is by the end of the movie. He never has a conversation with him. But when you open the movie by making it about Zoom, then all of a sudden we have a villain to attach to this movie, so that when we're going through the movie and the mystery of how did Zoom do this, because that's the reason why they decided to do it this way, because they gave us an actual villain to kind of follow, as opposed to in the live action Flash, where it's kind of just the world around him is like the villain as opposed to actually having anything that he can really be attached to, which is also why that movie starts to flounder. But like with this, by making it so that he thinks that Zoom is the one that did it, it makes him really go through it with like, I have to change everything, but I also have to stop this villain. And then you start seeing him in bits and pieces as you keep going through the story. So you're like, oh, he actually is here. His costume is in my ring. He wants me to know that he did it. I see him, and he didn't need to be seen, so he wants me to come after him. And then by the end, when Zoom and him are fighting, and Zoom says, "I'm not the one that did this," it's meant to be that moment of, yeah, your desire to save one person doomed the entire world. So it's one of those things where it's not that I don't think it's ineffective. I still think it is an effective storytelling choice because of it gets to this moment where now Barry has to contend with the fact that I'm the one that did this, and in this moment when he believed it was the villain the entire time, which is still like a pretty decent reveal. But I can agree that when you compare it to the idea of him knowing from the get-go that he did it and having to like contend with, I need to make these things change, it's just a different kind of way to tell that story. But this way that it was told didn't necessarily bother me.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it bothered me a little bit because of how the pacing was in the animation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
where, like, at some point, I was like, how come he's not trying to find Zoom anymore? And now he's getting involved in this war, this other conflict that's coming, or that's
Mm-hmm.
happening in that universe or in that timeline. And it's almost like he completely forgot about his pursuit of Zoom and gets involved in taking care of something else. Where in hindsight, like if you really think about it, is maybe not important because what should be prioritized is finding Zoom and stopping Zoom for whatever he's about to do, and then and that's kind of something that doesn't really happen because he's like, where like do heroes not like save the world in this timeline in this universe, and so I kind of like was expecting more of Flash trying to figure out what is Zoom up to, how do I find him in this timeline, but instead Zoom just kind of shows up and then does the
Mm-hmm.
reveal. So I think like in that sense I was a little, you know, bummed about it. I almost forgot about Zoom for a little bit because I was so interested in what was going on in that timeline, but also because that's what was being focused on during the movie. Um,
Right.
but then when Zoom came back, I was like, how come he didn't work on this at all? Like, he should be working on reversing what Zoom did.
Well,
So,
that's just it, right? He didn't know where Zoom was. Like, there's no way of
yeah.
finding Zoom. So and so it's like, well, if the option is to not do anything and wait for Zoom to appear, or to try and be a hero and help people, that's why the Flash is so. That's why he's such a great hero, because this is another world, and that's why he says in that moment where he's talking to all the other heroes, is like, heroes save other worlds even when it's not theirs. So he isn't thinking from the standpoint of, this isn't my world and I'm just going to reverse all this anyway. He's thinking, I'm here right now and I know these people and they're my friends. I have to stop this and save them. And like, I still have to find Zoom, but I don't know where he is. So I'm just going to focus on saving my friends, even if they don't know who I am. And even if this isn't my world, because that's what a hero does. That's what I do. So like, so in that way, it kind of even builds him up even more as a hero, because of the fact that he is willing to do whatever he can for this world, even though in the end, when he decides to go back in time, then that world won't exist anymore. But his mindset is, I have to save these people.
Yeah, so I get that, and I do like that part of
Mm-hmm.
it. My I think my only problem was just the flow of it and how it was presented. You know, like you said, it's a different way of telling the story. You know, using
Yeah.
Zoom versus it being something that Barry knew he was doing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it just, I don't know, like that part, it just bothered me a little bit. I wish that it was maybe
Oh
presented in
yeah.
a slightly different way, where that emphasis of like I can't do anything about Zoom, so instead I'm going to do this. Like, and I know there was a little bit of that, but it wasn't powerful enough for me. There wasn't a moment that was powerful enough for me to be like, okay, I forgive you for not trying to look for Zoom right now.
Right. No, I mean that's perfectly fair. They were saying in the chat about the context of the Zoom swerve also being based, at least in the comics, around the idea that Zoom has gone back in time before and started messing with things, and so this is supposed to be another moment of Zoom is at it again, and then it's like, oh no, it's not him, it's you. But that's something that actually isn't in the movie, but that is more prevalent in the comics itself. But going more about like how this is a Justice League movie, there's a lot of things that happen. Like a lot of the story about this movie is discovering what this world is in this movie and how things have changed and why they could have changed. Like, how does it make sense that that Bruce was killed instead of his parents, and how does it make sense that Clark landed in a different place when all of those events would have happened before Barry's mom died? And then how they explain it is like how a sonic boom works, and it caused a time boom where it rippled out from that moment in time, but it was like radial, and so it affected all these other moments, just nudging things over just a little bit, not changing things drastically, but changing them enough. But the thing that's really cool about this is kind of the discovery of what is different in this world. The discovery that the Joker is actually Bruce's mom in this world. And even that moment when you're not supposed to know, when you see Thomas Wayne, you don't know that it's Thomas Wayne, you think it's Bruce, and then that reveal is like, oh no, it's not Bruce at all, it's Thomas Wayne, and Bruce died. And so like, and then you have all these other moments about like what happened with Aquaman and Wonder Woman and how they have this war. Like, to me, I feel like the stakes of like the world ending are very well built in this movie because of the fact that it is, but it's also tying these moments to characters that we know and that we care about. And I couldn't help myself but think and wonder like if this could have been done in the live action Flash movie, because all of a sudden, like, we know who Aquaman is, we know who Wonder Woman is, we know who Cyborg is, we care about these characters because of just our past knowledge with them. So we don't want them to fight, we don't want them to die, we don't want these characters to like be hurting each other. But each of these Justice League members has some bearing on the plot, even if it's little. Like, even Hal Jordan, voiced by our very own Nathan Fillion, is in this movie, and he has a very bit part, but even he's in the movie and he has something to do. He fails at doing it, but even he has something to do. So I think that's one of the things I like the most about this movie, is that all of the League members, maybe except for like Superman, have some type of bearing on the plot with the decisions that they're making, because based on their decisions, it's actually affecting the world around them.
Yeah, and I agree. That's one of the things that I thought that the animation did a ton better, was just having more of the other Justice League characters while still being focused on Barry, because this is a Flash story still. And he works together with Batman and Cyborg. So there is a lot of presence from the other Justice League members in both timelines. So I really like that. I know they had that in the live action one, but it wasn't nearly enough, and we'll get into it later. But we had Michael Keaton instead of Ben Affleck, which is fine, I guess, but you know, they were trying to do something else. But anyways,
Yeah.
I think that because I watched the live action before watching the animation, I feel like I appreciated this version, more, because I got to see how the other characters are more involved. And
Yeah.
if in case you didn't know, I'm not sure if you got to see Flashpoint in the CW version, but
I did.
none of the Justice League characters are involved. So
Right.
getting to see this animation version, which I heard is closer to the comics, was way more exciting and way more like fanfaring for me than the other two versions.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I usually speak highly of animation, because when you have things happen in animation, you don't have to worry about actors that don't want to come back or not having the money to bring an actor back, or we can't use these characters in the television show with the Flash because they're owned or they don't want people seeing them. Like when you have an animated show, you can just go for it. You can go for the goal. And that's one of the things that's really great about this film is that you not only have like the main Justice League members, you have cameos from other characters that, you know, that we know that don't necessarily have speaking roles, but are just important for building the world. Because the whole thing about Flashpoint is that the world has changed because of something that Barry did, and I think that context is important because Barry wanted to change one thing for himself, and that one thing had a butterfly effect of literally changing the entire world and the lives of people that he cares about. So it's important to see how those lives were altered by his decision. So the world feels bigger and the choice feels more impactful when you see that it's not just affecting him, but it's actually affecting his teammates and other people that he cared about. So I really like that about the animated movie, and it's one of the things that I would have liked to see to see other renditions do. But I do think that it is interesting that in this movie, it is his father isn't there. That's one of the biggest difference between this one and the CW one and the live action movie, is that there's no father that he's trying to keep out of prison. And I feel like they did that because since it was an hour and 22 minutes, they were trying to streamline the movie as much as possible, and the movie very much is streamlined. It is like it hits the ground running, like there's no wasted time, at least in my opinion. But for the CW, that was very much a thing of I have to get my father out of prison, and it was the same thing they did for the Flash movie. But what the Flash movie did, that was the same thing as the Flashpoint movie, was that they removed Zoom from their equation as far as being the one that killed Barry's mom. In both of those movies, they didn't make an actual like note that her mom was killed, that his mom was killed by a speedster. But in the CW version, it was absolutely made clear that his mom was killed by some type of supernatural force, which ended up being a speedster.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting to see all these different versions of it. I think at one point, I think it would be a good idea for me to read the comic, the actual Flashpoint story, because I think it is the biggest and most interesting Flash story that was ever written. So, I think it probably puts him on the map in terms of like ability and growth, and it's just such a good and interesting story. Because Batman's parents die, and that's always a whole thing with him. But like Barry actually still has his father technically, and being able to run so fast that he can go back in time is also pretty awesome. He's kind of OP in my opinion.
Yeah.
but but yeah, I mean, the other thing I really liked about the animation though is just even though it was super condensed and really fast paced, everything still felt pretty intentional. They really bookend the whole thing with Zoom by having him at the beginning and making it clear that Zoom doesn't care if he dies, as if he can.
So much hate. That man is so hateful.
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird way to see Zoom because I feel like Zoom isn't like that in the CW show, but they use that as like a vessel for proof of him not being the one that did this, because he's willing to die to hurt Barry, and at the end he's even like, I don't care if you don't make it, I'm gonna try to stop you from fixing this because I like seeing how much pain you're in, and I would love for the world to stay like this if it means that it sucks for you. And they already established his character being like that at the beginning, so it in that sense it makes sense. Like they were planning that the whole time, so everything just feels very intentional in terms of the way the story was told.
Yeah. So that's basically everything that I have to say about it. One of the last things I wanted to just mention was that we're going to talk about how like how good these versions of this story how this story is. And when we talk about the Flash movie version, the live action movie, I think most of us will agree that that is the worst version of this story that has been told. But the Flashpoint animated movie and the CW live action are very good versions of that story. And none of those versions are going to be as good as the comic that they came from because like they just said it in the chat, like the more context you have for the Flash, the better it is. And then so there's always going to be something missing where with Flashpoint you're missing certain context that you would want that is related to just the Flash's history, and in the live act excuse me, and in the CW show you're missing the fact that his choice actually affects the Justice Leaguers as a whole and like all these other superheroes, but you can't have that in the CW show because you just can't. So there's always going to be something missing from these different adaptations that is going to be there in the comic book. So they're never going to be as strong as the comic could be. Plus, the comic has more time, essentially, that they can like get you to see this world over the course of all these different issues. But that being said, I think that this version and the CW version are very, very good ways to experience the story of Flashpoint if you've never experienced it before.
Okay, so
I
I
was saying if you agree.
yeah. Oh yeah. No, I agree. I thought that was your closing thought.
Oh no, it's okay. But anyway, do you have anything else that you want to say before we get out of here?
Nope. That's pretty much it for me.
All right, so that's what we thought about the Flashpoint Paradox animated DC film. What did you guys think about it? Have you seen it? Have you seen the CW Flash, the Flashpoint from the CW show? Have you seen the Flash live action movie with Ezra Miller? What did you think about how all these different ways of telling this story compare? Have you read the comics? What have you thought about this and more? Comment below. Let us know. And we're down there. If you give us a like, share, subscribe. Even if you don't, though, I have been Chris, and this has been
Cheryl, and I'm Adam Webb.